The wind clawed across the canyon, dry and sharp, carrying grit that stung Ezekiel Boone's eyes as his horse pressed on to the dying light. The sun had already broken against the horizon, leaving only a red smear that bled into the rock walls. Each hoofbeat echoed hollow, like a drum in a forgotten chapel. The desert whispered around him, not with words, but with a sound of emptiness that never let go. Up ahead, the road narrowed between spines of sandstone. There, off to the right, something broke the stillness. A wagon sat crippled in the wash. One wheel splintered and sunk deep into sand. The mules were gone, their harness torn free. Ezekiel slowed, eyes narrowing beneath the brim of his hat. The air carried no birdsong, no crickets, only the hiss of wind across stone. Then he heard it, a muffled struggle, a voice, faint, raw, breaking through cloth. "Please, open it. I can't breathe." The sound came from the wagon bed. Ezekiel's hand drifted the knife on his belt. The leather creaked as he dismounted, boots sinking in dust. He moved slow, each step deliberate, as though the shadows themselves might lunge. The wagon's boards were cracked, the tarp half-torn, and in the center, bound tight with rope, lay a burlap sack that twisted and kicked like it held a living soul. "Please!" The voice rasped again, desperate now. Ezekiel's breath caught in his throat. He knelt, running callous fingers over the knots. They were fresh, tied by a steady hand, not the work of panic, but of purpose. He pressed the blade under the rope, steel whispering against fiber. The sack shifted, the shape inside pressing upward as if begging for air. The rope snapped. With a slow pull, Ezekiel peeled back the burlap, dust spilling from its weave. His jaw tightened as a face beneath the sack came into view, pale, bruised, streaked with dirt, yet unmistakable. Clara Whitlock, the widow from town, her eyes wild with fear, lips trembling for breath. For an instant, Ezekiel froze. His horse stamped nervously behind him, as though sensing the weight of revelation. Clara gasped, dragging in air like it was her first breath in days. Her voice broke as she clutched at his arm. "They'll be back," she whispered hoarsely, her words burning with dread. "You don't understand, they'll be back." The desert seemed to tighten around them, every shadow stretching long. Above, the last line of sunlight vanished, leaving the canyon drowned in dusk. Ezekiel straightened, the knife still in his hand, the sack fallen at his boots. His heart pounded against his ribs, not from the act of rescue, but from the unspoken question that carved its way into his chest. Who would bind a widow in the heart of the desert and leave her to die in silence? And why, out of all the roads and all the men in this wide, unforgiving land, had she been left for him to find? Clara's nails dug into Ezekiel's sleeve as she pulled herself upright, her breath ragged, her face pale beneath streaks of grit. Her eyes darted over the darkening canyon rim, as though expecting riders to spill down at any moment. "They're coming," she whispered, voice sharp as broken glass. "Crane's men don't leave loose ends." Ezekiel's jaw tightened. The name struck like a match in dry brush. Silas Crane. He hadn't heard it spoken aloud in years, yet the sound of it lit old embers he had buried deep. Clara stumbled, nearly falling. Ezekiel steadied her, his callous hand firm on her elbow. She shook him off, squaring her shoulders though her body trembled. "He thinks he owns the town. My land, my life, but I told him no. I told him I'd never sell." Her voice cracked, but her eyes blazed. "So he sent wolves." The canyon wind shifted, carrying with it the low thrum of hooves. Distant, faint, but steady, a dust line rose far off across the flats. Small, but growing. Claire saw it too. She turned to Ezekiel, clutching his arm. "We got minutes, not more. You have to move." Ezekiel's stare lingered on the horizon. His horse shifted, snorting uneasy. The rhythm of the hooves grew clearer, like war drums rolling across the open land. "Get on," he said finally, his voice flat but hard as stone. He boosted Clara into the saddle, then swung up behind her. The horse lurched forward, hooves biting into dry earth. The trail wound through gulches and jagged stone. Shadows stretched long across the path, the fading light painting the land in stripes of gold and black. Behind them, The thunder pursuit began to swell. "They won't stop," Clara muttered, twisting to look over her shoulder. Crane never forgets. He never forgives. Her words struck deeper than she knew. Ezekiel's mind flashed back, smoke-filled streets, bodies on dust, his own gun hand slick with blood. The ghost of Abilene. That's what they once called him. A name he buried with his wife. A life he swore he'd never touch again. The wind tore at his coat as the horse leapt a dry wash. The sound of pursuit closing in. A rifle cracked, the bullet winding off stone. Clara ducked low with a gasp. "They'll kill me, Ezekiel," she cried, her voice breaking. "And they'll burn everything I own." The path twisted, narrowing between two sheer walls of rock. The riders' shouts carried on the wind, closer now, echoing off the canyon. Ezekiel's grip tightened on the reins, his other hand hovering near the empty holster at his hip. He had buried the gun, buried the man he used to be, but the dust rising behind them whispered of ghosts that would not rest. As the canyon funneled him into shadow, Clara's hand found his wrist. Her grip was iron. "You can't outrun him," she said. "You know you can't." The hoofbeats closed in, louder, nearer, like a storm breaking across stone. The church door slammed shut behind them, the iron latch clattering as Ezekiel shoved the beam into place. Dust rained down from the rafters at the force. Clara leaned against the wall, clutching her ribs where a bruise was already spreading, her breath sharp and uneven. Outside, hooves pounded the dry creek bed, the sound rolling like thunder. Shadows slid against the cracked stained glass, torchlight spilling in streaks of red and gold across the warped pews. "They've got us boxed," Clara muttered, steadying the old rifle she'd snatched from the church wall. The wood was splintered, the barrel rusted, but her hands held it firm. Ezekiel stood in silence, eyes scanning the broken beams above, the holes in walls where moonlight and night air seeped through. His hand brushed the floorboards, the boards hollow where he remembered burying steel long ago. A voice outside rose above the hoofbeats, harsh, mocking. "Boone, we know you're in there. Hand the woman over, and maybe we'll let you crawl back to that lonely ranch of yours." Laughter followed, rough and cruel. Clara's jaw tightened. She raised a rifle toward the window slit, her finger trembling on the trigger. Ezekiel laid a hand on the barrel, lowering it. His touch was steady, his voice low. "Not yet." A shot cracked, splintering with inches from Clara's head. She flinched, teeth clenched, but didn't drop the rifle. Outside, more torches flared, their glow painting the windows in fire. The attackers shouted, boots striking the dirt. Then silence, heavy, waiting silence. Ezekiel pulled at the floorboard, with groaning as it gave way. Beneath, wrapped in oilskin, lay the revolver he swore never to touch again. His hand hovered above it, fingers curling, shaking. Another crash shattered the stillness. Bullets tore through the walls, glass bursting from the windows. Clara dropped to her knees behind a pew, aimed and fired. The rifle roared, the recoil nearly throwing her back, but one shadow outside stumbled into the torchlight and fell. Shouts rose, furious now. More gunfire lit the night, muzzle flashes sparking like lightning. Smoke seeped through the cracks, the air growing thick with gunpowder and dust. Clara's voice cut through the chaos, raw and defiant. "They won't take me alive. Ezekiel, you hear me? They'll never take me alive." Ezekiel's grip closed on the revolver. The weight of it sank into his palm like an old truth rising from a grave. He spun the cylinder, the sound sharp as a rattler's warning. He met Clara's eyes. In her face he saw no fear, only fire, bruised, battered, but unbroken. Outside, another torch arced through the air, smashing against the church wall. Flames licked at the dry wood, smoke curling toward the rafters. The church groaned under the weight of fire and fury. Clara chambered another round, her jaw set. Ezekiel stepped forward, revolver in hand, the years falling away with each breath. The ghost of Abilene had not yet been buried. Dawn bled across the horizon, pale fire spilling over the ridge, painting the smoke in shades of gold and ash. The church smoldered behind them, its timbers groaning as flames licked the steeple. Clara leaned against the doorway, blood on her sleeve, her breath sharp but steady. In the street below, riders fanned out, rifles raised, their torches guttering in the wind. At their center sat Silas Crane, black coat flowing, eyes narrow as a hawk's. His voice carried cold and clear. "Boone, you can't hide behind ghosts. Bring her out or burn with her." Ezekiel stepped into the open. Dust swirled around his boots, the revolver heavy in his grip. The years fell away with each breath. The weight of silence pressed down until even the wind stilled. Crane laughed, low and cruel. "So the rancher finally crawls from his hole. Thought you'd buried that hand of yours." He leaned forward in the saddle, sneer cutting across his face. "But men like you don't forget. You just rot." The riders shifted, tense, waiting. Clara's voice cut through the hush, fierce and unbroken despite the blood on her lips. "You'll never have my land, Crane. You'll never own me." Crane's smile faltered. He raised his hand. The street erupted. Gunfire cracked like thunder, dust exploding around Ezekiel's boots. He dropped to one knee, revolver flashing. One rider fell, then another, torches tumbling to the ground. Clara fired from the doorway, her rifle barking, sparks flying from the barrel. She staggered but held her aim, each shot biting through the smoke. Crane's men pressed forward, shouting, bullets whining against stone. Ezekiel moved like water, each step measured, each shot final. The ghost of Abilene lived in the stillness between heartbeats, his hand faster than memory, his eyes cold as the desert sky. One by one the riders broke, their courage bleeding out into the dust. Horses screamed, men scattered, shadows fleeing into the rising sun. Crane alone remained. He dismounted slow, boots sinking in the dirt, pistol glinting in his hand. His sneer returned, though sweat streaked his brow. "You can't kill me, Boone. You're just a shadow of what you were." Ezekiel's revolver leveled, steady. His voice came quiet, rough as gravel. "A shadow's enough." The gun spoke in the same breath. Crane staggered, eyes wide, his pistol falling from lifeless fingers. Dust rose as he collapsed, the echo of his fall carried off by the wind. Silence followed. Only the creak of burning wood, and Clara's ragged breath filled the air. Ezekiel lowered his gun. Clara stepped forward, her face streaked with ash, her eyes blazing with something more than survival. Side by side, they stood in the ruin of smoke and dawn. And so the tale lived on, of the widow who would not bow, and the rancher who carried ghosts in his hand. Around campfires, when desert winds howled, they said justice rose at morning, carried on dust and blood, and the sun bore witness to legends reborn.